I can be pretty hard on competitions in the way that they're scored. And a lot of that, in fact, almost all of that, is essentially down to one idea, and that is that competitions need to serve a purpose. Um, the way a lot of them look, they appear to have been designed as just a let's see who's better on the surface kind of thing. And it seems like they don't give much thought. It really seems like they don't give much thought as to what it is they're testing and the validity of the test. Now, maybe this comes about by, by being a little more involved in looking at scientific literature and stuff. But one of the big things when you're conducting a formal study, and look, I'm not a scientist, I'm a casual that listens to a lot of scientists and tries to read papers. But one of the things that you do when you're doing formal science is to construct methods that can be controlled and tested for in a way that's relevant to the data that you're looking to obtain. Um, the methods section of the paper is incredibly important because it gives you an idea of like how they conducted or how they constructed testing parameters, or if it's like a statistical analysis or something, what the inclusion criteria for the grouping of papers that they were looking at were, and how they designed those parameters and whatnot. Like the construction of their methods is incredibly important. Like it's not just go in and read the abstract. Of course, you should, like any halfwit knows that, but more than that, it's not even just going in and looking at the results in the discussion, which is a really tempting thing to do when you have a hard time with statistics. But the methods is really, 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 really important. And yes, sometimes some ways that studies are designed, it's really hard to get a truly representative sample and stuff. So sometimes you let a little bit of that stuff slide because you know that that's going to come out in the in the meta-analyses in a few years and whatnot. Because the truth is there are hundreds, thousands of labs conducting studies all the time, and over time, over decades, you are eventually going to get replications of studies, or you're going to get fresh studies that you can all conglomerate into analyses and kind of get a clearer picture. So like there's a lot of stuff to think about. So when it comes to competition for martial arts, really any competition, we're talking at athletics in general, and for us martial arts in specific, we have to know what it is that we're trying to test. And by my reckoning, there are two valid ways to compete in martial arts. One, of course, and this is the most obvious one, is the overall fight. Training the actual fight, which is the direct physical skill set that has the most direct transfer from our training to application, right? Training the fight and competing in the fight is the ultimate test. Now, unfortunately, because of ethics and just like long-term safety implications and whatnot, there is no competition that is truly 100% representative of a real fight. It can't be, and we know that, and it's ridiculous to expect everybody who does martial arts to go and become somebody who operates in the real world in violence professions. That's not reasonable. There's not even enough jobs for that, compared to people who practice martial arts. But nevertheless, right, combat sports are a reasonable proxy to kind of get somewhere. And we've discussed the differences between real world violence and competitions before multiple times. We're not going to get into that here. But nevertheless, right, you should be training the fight in some kind of way that makes a lot of sense. Now, again, because of all those limitations and everything, you're always going to have holes that don't get covered. So clearly, and yes, I'm biased because it was my sport when I was an amateur competitor. Uh, I think MMA is the best option. I do think the rules that stand in MMA could use some tweaking to make it even better. But MMA is the most authentic, available competition for training the fight, or for testing the fight. Um, and again, that's flaws, taken into consideration, right? Because they're just inevitably there. But there are other options that are reasonable, right? Sambo, combat sambo, right? Sports sambo is just mean judo. Um, Combat sambo, if you have access to it, is a good option. Um, I think Sanda is great. It does have a lot of reality problems, but I think Sanda is great. It's a great stepping stone towards MMA. But Sanda's a reasonable one, and of all the kickboxing styles, I think Sanda's the one that has the most carryover to a real fight. Um, in the world of like grappling focused, well, I mean, you really can't beat old school pancrase like back in the Boss Rutan days, old school pancrase, because it was essentially real pro wrestling, right? They didn't allow closed fist strikes to the head, but you could palm strike, you could kick. All submissions were legal. There were no pins, but I mean, but that's fine. I like pins. I don't love pins as a winning condition, but I do like pins. Um, they have their uses, of course. But I think old school pancrase is great. And the problem is there since pancrase became just MMA, there really hasn't been anybody to step in and do that thing the same way. So there's a couple of options out there, right? And there's a whole ton of MMA organizations, and again, there's a variety of rules. All of them have flaws in their rules. Some of them are inevitable. Some of them, I think, could be altered. Uh, but that's kind of where you have the fight. Now, there are kind of subcategories that do a pretty good job, like for grappling. Like if you're just training the grappling portion of a fight, I mean, no holds barred grappling, like you see in ADCC and whatnot, is pretty good. Now, the rules do allow some things that are not functional in a real fight, but again, if you're going to be separating things into like grappling and striking, it kind of is what it is. And then same thing on like the striking side, like I already mentioned Sanda, but like things like Muay Thai and Lethwei do a really, really good job of it being like a fight despite being a limited fight. Um, so like there's something there, right? But I said that there were two things that competition should be doing, right? So if the one thing for us is training or testing the fight, the other thing that we should be concerned with is attribute testing. And this is where it gets a little harder to juggle, because if you're attribute testing, you actually need to have a whole battery of attribute tests, things that overlap with each other or at least adjacent to each other, so that you get the full spectrum in total, at some point. That's a much harder thing to do. My analogy for this, and if you guys are older than me, and technically speaking, I was too old for it because I was in high school. I had a gamer friend that kind of got me into it as a casual as I am, because I'm not a gamer. But the it would come out kind of like Pokemon, right? Where you travel around getting different badges from different gyms. And what's the purpose of that, right? So that you can face different challenges. In a sense, here for the older guys, this would be something that might make more sense. It would be like collecting merit badges in the Boy Scouts, right? And I was only in Scouts for a very short time, probably a year, less than a year, something like that. I mean, I only did one camping trip. But like the merit badge thing, right? The merit badge thing is like, hey, look, here are a bunch of things that you should have some competency in, and if you test to a certain level of competency, right, you get like a little badge you can put on your sash. and you could do this a number of ways. You don't have to have a sash with badges, or you don't need to look like a Klingon. But the the idea of having attribute challenges that overall kind of add up to that, I still don't know that the sum of all those parts would equal the whole, because the fight, you know, the fight is such a thing, right? When all those things are overlapping and intermingling with each other, that overlap is as important as those things all being present. Whereas when you separate them out, you're missing the overlap. And without that overlap, I think you're missing a major piece of the puzzle. Uh, Nevertheless, though, I think it's, especially because the majority of martial artists will never have a fight, a real life fight in their lives, will never face a self-defense situation in their lives. I think that that's probably mostly okay. I think that it's a reasonable, low bar, high school level kind of thing that you could throw at people. But you could have attribute challenges, right? Like what is the point of judo competition? Is judo competition teaching you how to fight? I mean, especially today with the IJF rules and everything, right, being so restrictive. And I know they just opened up a little bit, but not much, not enough. Judo is not testing you against the whole fight. Judo is testing you against judo. It's seeing who's the better judo person against judo. And the truth is, that's kind of how all of these fractured sports are, right? Like, boxing technically isn't style specific. Boxing is just a rule set, and you can go in there with whatever skill set you have as long as you abide by the rules and see how you fare. But you're not going to get very far unless you kind of specialize in boxing, right? And same thing with judo, same thing with BJJ, same thing with catch wrestling, same thing with kickboxing. There's limited overlap with things, and even though technically with combat sports you're not looking at unified systems, but you're looking at rule sets to be competed, usually speaking, it's open enough that whatever skill set you have, you can try to apply it towards that rule set. It just tends to work out better if you train specifically for that. But then that's a problem with the way these things work, right? Is that they force a level of specialization that doesn't have a ton of transfer. There's a reason we don't see a lot of high-level kickboxing, high-level boxing, high-level Brazilian jiu-jitsu, even high-level wrestling in MMA, despite the fact that you have a lot of people who are specialists in those things entering MMA that kind of more or less fill in the gaps with other things. But it almost doesn't matter because, again, the overlap of those skill sets being layered on top of each other makes it a completely different beast than the individual parts combined. So nevertheless, I do think that there is some legitimacy, especially for recreational people, to have overlap across different attribute competitions. I am notoriously not a fan of point sparring, especially as a competition. I think point sparring as a competition is flat out stupid. But while it doesn't tell you anything about somebody's ability to fight, it is a great attribute builder. And that attribute is, can I hit you? Can I touch you in a way that does not allow you to touch me back, right? That's a really, really important skill to develop as a striker. Not because you're always going to be able to do that, but because if you can increase your chances of landing clean hits without retaliation, you are developing that part of the skill set that is going to allow you to take less damage in a fight while perhaps coming up on top. Now, there are so many other parts of the fight that you have to train that it's not enough, but it is something. I think it is a fantastic training game. I think it's maybe a decent merit badge worthy thing, not something that you compete in, but that's something you just like accrue training hours in. I think that's reasonable. Generally speaking, I especially don't like, stop and go, mediated point sparring. I don't particularly like that. I understand it in weapons. It actually kind of makes sense in weapons. that's a whole other topic, right? Weapons have a whole different thing that's necessary for both training and competing. We're really talking about empty hand only here. So I like the idea of point sparring, and I will even hesitantly accept stop and go point sparring because it's a decent attribute builder. I just don't think it's good enough to make up even a large part of your training, but it's something to pepper in from time to time. It's pretty good. I think that doing, say, Kyokushin rules or full contact Taekwondo rules, where you're not allowed to punch the face, right? So you can, um, you can only strike to the body, right? Target control. It's a decent attribute. I don't think it's a very good competition method, but it's a decent attribute builder because it forces you to think about changing your targets. Now, again, you can run into the problem where, you stop putting your hands up, you stop defending your head very well. It can make you exclude the head as a target, to some detrimental effect. So again, it's not something you'd want to do a ton of, but to pepper in your training here and there, not a bad idea. Obviously, grappling goes without saying. Pin wrestling, just takedown wrestling, submission wrestling, all of those are good attribute builders, despite the fact that they're so limited. They don't really, they don't really filter into the whole fight a ton, to the point where you can win it without it. Dan Severn being a massive exception. That's a whole thing. And again, so there's some questions about some of this stuff. Really, we don't have hard data on this. This isn't science. This is very much art, and art in the sense of a learned skill, a tinkered with, built from the bottom up, experiential, heuristic kind of skill built, not fundamental laws of reality being filtered down. I think boxing is great. This, modern conventional boxing, not in the way boxing should properly be used to just striking competition, but modern conventional boxing, like punching with the front of the fist. I mean, look, nobody has better punches because they specialize in that, right? Boxing has proven to be kind of almost the most important striking art, simply for the fact that it enhances everything else that it gets added to, whereas you can't really bring anything else into boxing to make boxing much better. It's kind of a one-way road. I think kickboxing is great. So you look at all of these things, right? You could just look through the different competitions and try to see what attributes are they building. Just because I had some guys go and do Sanda this past year, 2024. Sanda's got some really cool stuff about it, right? Because it is throws and kickboxing. Now, the kickboxing is more limited than I would like, especially at the amateur level, the IWUF level. There's kind of some problems with that. I would much like the Koshu Lei Thai is a little better. If they had the striking much more open to, say, like a Muay Thai level of striking, with elbows and knees, having clinch work available, which is not there's a bunch of things I would like better. Honestly, Lethwei is Sanda but better. But it other than the one competition we had in Wyoming, I don't even think Lethwei is legal in any jurisdiction in the U.S. because it's so open, and they'll sometimes call it bare knuckle, but it's the rope wraps and all that. You get it. Lethwei is the ultimate striking art. It's just not really available unless you live in very certain places and you have access to that training. But there's some really cool stuff in Sanda. The idea of being able to clinch up and get a takedown while somebody's trying to strike you is huge. Sanda guys do something that we see missing a lot in MMA, and that I've talked about big time, coming from a traditional martial arts background, is that the infighting, the hand fighting, the bridging and trapping, which a term I hate, but all of that stuff is like missing from MMA. I mean, it shows up here and there, right? You know, it's not a 100% thing, right? But it does not have a strong enough presence in MMA. But if you get people into the habit of the idea of like, while you're striking everything, you can actually like clinch up and control somebody's striking to then throw a takedown or something, man, you get it so much better. Rather than just the meat smash against the cage that we typically see, or the guy falls down and the other guy jumps on top of him thing that we see. Takedowns are, I mean, they've kind of lost their glory in MMA, and it sucks. I mean, they do happen. They do happen. They just don't seem to have the prominence that they did for a little while. You know, of course, you don't have phenoms like Karo Parisian doing it, right? Or Ronda Rousey with her specialized, you know, small repertoire of high percentage throws that she landed. Like, you get those individuals, but on whole, you just don't get a lot of great takedowns. You get a lot of stumble, fall, jump on top kind of stuff. So Sandog kind of covers that really, really well. Traditional martial arts could cover that. But you get all these guys that are wrestlers, and where's the takedowns? They just shoot for double legs, and yeah, the double leg is the highest percentage takedown in MMA, but there are better takedowns. Just because it's a high percentage takedown doesn't mean it's the best takedown. It just means it's the one that people can kind of land. But it typically leads to massive scrambles. It doesn't leave you in the most secure positions to land things. There are just better takedowns for ending up in control positions. So anyway, look, I've been rambling on for quite a while about this because this is something I'm actually like, I'm pretty obsessed with is trying to find the way to make competition relevant. So that one, it is still an engaging and fun thing that people can have fun as a sport with, but also something that can transfer outside of sport into the just in case insurance, self-defense, real world violence kind of thing that we might need, though probably not. And so I think that's kind of the two ways that we have about it, right? Is one, test the direct fight, which is mostly just going to be MMA and some subcategories that are just adjacent to MMA. And then the other thing would be having a battery of attribute competitions that kind of test you on various things that either, again, overlap or are directly adjacent to one another in a way that kind of still gets you to that MMA point without going full MMA at any one given point. I think those are kind of the two ways to do it. I don't know. Tell me what you think. Do you have a preferred method of competition? Are there competitions you think are better than others? I mean, I've given my opinion, and I'm sure that I'll come up with something that I've missed here at a later date. But I don't know. Tell me what you think. I will talk to you guys later. Good journey. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, share. Check us out on our other socials, and please head over to blacksunboxing.com to get a little more info, including how to contact us. Furthermore, if you are in the Phoenix area, please feel free to stop in, say hi, join in for a class, whatever. Also, if you ever see us cite sources or just for additional content, please check out our Substack. That is where we put all of the sources we use in our videos and is a major part of this. Plus, it serves as a membership platform for long distance learning and for people who would like to support us but aren't local. We would greatly appreciate it if you signed up. Even just the free membership helps us out a lot. All right, I will see you guys in the next video. Good journey.